Thank you, Aaron. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Aaron mentioned, my name is Brian Dusk. I'm a senior grants consultant with Hanover, and I'm excited about presenting to you today because for most of my adult life, I lived in Arkadelphia, just up the road from you, and recently moved to Colorado, but we still have family in the area and head back there pretty often. So welcome from someone who used to be nearby. Today we're going to talk about NSF and look at several elements of the agency, talk about how to develop competitive proposals for NSF, and then look at an opportunity from NSF that may be of interest to many of you. While we are going through the webinar, as Aaron mentioned, if you can keep your lines muted, that will help us avoid additional noise. But if you have questions and have access to your computer, you can type questions into the chat box on the left, and I can answer them as we go, or we'll have time for questions at the end. Just so you know, there's a lot of information in this presentation, and so I'm going to gloss over some of the slides and leave them for you to look at later on. You'll have that information in hand so you can refer back to it later. And if I'm speaking too fast, which is not a common thing for me, please let me know in the chat box and I'll try to slow down a bit. So we're going to do an overview of NSF, look at how the proposal process works, the review process, talk about building competitiveness with NSF, and then explore that opportunity that I mentioned. So let's start with an overview of NSF. NSF was created by Congress way back in 1950. It is an independent federal agency, and by independent, we mean that it is administered by the federal government, but holds a degree of independence that is not seen in most other federal agencies. Its mission is driven by a board of scientists and other stakeholders. Its director and assistant directors and most of its staff are scientists, many of whom come to the organization from academia and go back to academia or industry after a brief tenure at the foundation. And so it is largely an organization driven by and for scientists. It funds about $7.5 billion in operations each year. That's increased slightly for this year, which is always good news. And about a quarter of all federal funding for basic research to colleges and universities comes from NSF, with the balance of that coming from DOD, occasionally NIH, USDA, and other agencies. NSF has multiple goals, most of which were established from the outset when Congress authorized the agency. And these are to advance the frontiers of knowledge, specifically knowledge in various scientific areas, cultivate a strong workforce in science and engineering, expand scientific literacy among the citizens, and to build research infrastructure at institutions across the nation. All of these things also contribute to supporting excellence in science and engineering education, and there are many ways in which the agency supports STEM education, both through outreach and education associated with research and through opportunities specifically designed to enhance education. NSF does a lot of different things, but most of the work that they do funds basic science research, funds equipment to support basic science research, or funds education all the way from pre-K to postgraduate and informal science education. NSF does not fund health-focused research, although there are some caveats there, and it doesn't fund education outside of STEM. So the caveat on the health-focused research is that NSF used to be completely banned from doing anything that had an appearance of relevance to human health. But we all recognize that much of basic research, especially in the area of biology, has the potential to influence clinical applications or human health related research at other times. And that now has become more acceptable at NSF. And so basic research that has potential human health implications is okay, as long as the focus of the work is not on human health. The next several slides are going to give you an overview of the NSF structure, going from very broad to very focused. And the purpose of showing you this is to show you how you can search for the right person to talk to at NSF, and to give you some insight into what we'll discuss in some of the later slides about how the proposal award process works. So the NSF Foundation is directed by a director, an appointed director, and informed by a board of advisors, the National Science Board. These two in combination inform the mission of the agency, which is carried out by these multiple directorates, which you see are also led by directors. Each of these directorates has multiple divisions within them, and each of those divisions are divided into sections or clusters, and those sections or clusters are the organizational units that make specific grant programs. And so, for example, you see here the Bio, or Directorate for Biological Sciences, has this specific division, the Division of Environmental Biology, which has clusters related to evolutionary processes, and that cluster offers a couple of different programs in evolutionary genetics and evolutionary ecology, both of which have their own grant operations. Within each of these hierarchies, each of these organizational substructures, we have different staff members, and their roles are important to understanding how you interact with them and how they contribute to grant-making decisions and program operations. So the director leads the agency and sets the overall agenda in collaboration with that National Science Board. The assistant directors lead the directorates and set research directions for those directorates. The division directors lead the divisions and manage the research within those areas. And then the program directors, also known as program officers, manage individual grant-making programs. And when I say individual, I mean they are responsible for a specific program, but they may have multiple programs that they administer. Those program directors, again, also known as program officers, and I may refer to them either way in this presentation, they're the ones responsible for communicating with you about your grant ideas. They shepherd grants through the review process, and then ultimately make recommendations to the division directors about which proposals should be funded. NSF has multiple grant mechanisms, and so when you go searching the NSF website, you may run across a program description, a program announcement, a program solicitation, or a Dear Colleague letter. Funding can come from any or all of these, and it's not critical that you understand the distinctions, but it can be helpful in understanding how you go about preparing your proposal if you know which of these you're replying to. So program description is basically a broad description of the program organized by an NSF directorate or division. Most of these encourage submission of proposals that you've developed an idea, you feel like it fits in the area of evolutionary ecology, and so you reach out and say, I'd like to submit this, and they say, great. Our submission window is open from September 1st to September 30th every year. Make sure you send in your proposal during that time period. And that's about the extent of the guidance that you get, unless you discuss with a program officer or look through what's been funded in that area. With a program announcement, you get a formal publication announcing a specific program. It can often provide more detail than a program description. So if the area of evolutionary biology says we're announcing programs in evolutionary ecology, they may describe in a paragraph or two what they expect to see in that area and the types of activities that they expect to fund. And so that takes a little bit of the guesswork out of deciding whether or not your project is a good fit there, and can provide you some insight into how you should describe your project so that it meets the priorities in that area. A program solicitation is the most detailed opportunity. It includes a lot of information about what's expected, what should be funded, who's eligible, how long the award will be offered for, what the amount of funding available is, and often includes review criteria specific to that opportunity. The fourth opportunity is a Dear Colleague letter. These letters often let people know when opportunities are coming available, or let people know that NSF is interested for a limited period of time in receiving proposals about something more focused, more narrowly focused than some of these other opportunities. And sometimes Dear Colleague letters don't have specific funding associated with them, and you have to reach out to a program officer to say, I have an interest in this area raised by the Dear Colleague letter. What's my next step? There are many opportunities at NSF that go beyond those individual programs, and some of these are broad programs that apply across multiple directorates or divisions. Many of these you've probably heard of or might have some interest in, such as the Faculty Early Career Development Program known as NSF Career, the EPSCoR program, Major Research and Instrumentation Program, which provides funding for equipment, and all institutions are eligible. There are other programs here listed that you may be interested in, and it's important to know when you're applying to these that there are program officers devoted to specific content areas. So there may be a program officer for engineering, one for computer science, and another for biology. And so identifying the right program officer within these programs is important when you're looking to find more information. We'll look at one of those cross-cutting opportunities, STEM, at the end of this presentation. So NSF provides a lot of different resources to help you develop proposals and to understand expectations of the agency. Probably the most important, in addition to a program solicitation or announcement, is the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. This is a large document available completely online that is updated probably annually in most cases, sometimes more often, rarely less often. And this guide has all of the most recent information on what is required to apply to NSF. Much of this information is probably not relevant to you on the front end. Your sponsored programs office is aware of a lot of the requirements and can help make sure that your application meets those requirements. But there are areas where this can be really helpful, such as understanding how to describe prior results from NSF support in your application, how to develop a biosketch, how to meet formatting requirements for a document, and pretty much any other question you might have about how your proposal should appear and what you should do once you get an award all appears in this document. So be sure to consult it as you go through the process. So let's talk about that process, applying for an NSF grant. All grants begin with a great idea. You look for funders, in this case, a program or opportunity within NSF, build a concept, figure out how to sell it, which includes understanding your audience and understanding the mission and needs of the funder, developing a formal application that tailors your concept to the audience of interest. If you do everything just right and the agency is interested, you can get a grant award, do the work, and then prepare to do the cycle all again. At NSF, it follows pretty much the cycle. You begin with your idea, you identify the right division or section or program to fund it, develop a concept and reach out to a program director to discuss that concept, and then develop your application. If your application is not funded at NSF, you have the opportunity to resubmit. We recommend that in most cases you do resubmit after reviewing your feedback, but make sure that you have a conversation with a program officer or program director before deciding to resubmit. And the reason for that is that the program director is involved in those funding decisions, and it may be that the program director feels that your proposal is a better fit for a different area or has some guidance that will help you understand how to be more successful on that resubmission. Developing a great idea is not always easy, but understanding what NSF is looking for can help you tailor your idea to make it a great fit for NSF. So NSF looks at two primary categories when they're considering whether an idea is fundable. They look at the intellectual merit of the work, which is its potential to advance knowledge in your field. So whatever your field happens to be, understanding where the gaps in knowledge are and developing grant proposals that address those gaps contributes to advancing the field. And that's really key to a great research proposal for NSF. Even in areas where we're talking about STEM education or other mission-oriented approaches for NSF, the intellectual merit still stems from how does what you're doing here advance the field. So if we're talking about STEM education and a particular opportunity is designed to increase participation of a particular group or enhance the workforce capabilities in a particular area, then understanding what the gaps are, either at your institution, regionally, or nationally, can help you develop a proposal that will advance that area. Broader impacts are how the research or program that you're developing benefits society. And there are specific societal outcomes of interest to NSF listed here, but you can also propose to address other societal outcomes of interest. Some of the examples NSF provides are increasing economic competitiveness, improving education and teacher development, developing partnerships between academia and industry, or improving national security. Once you have a general idea of what you want to propose, you need to find the right NSF program. So mostly we're talking about research-focused work when we're talking about finding the right program, because for most of your educational programs and things along those lines, you should be replying to a specific funding opportunity, a program solicitation, such as NSF ESTIM. But when you're looking at research, you want to find the right program. Look at the NSF website, read materials from the divisions of interest, look at their sections and clusters clusters and programs. See if there are any program announcements that describe NSF's interest in works similar to yours. Keep in mind that the work that you're proposing to do may be relevant to more than one NSF program, and you may have to look at multiple things. You can use keyword searches on the NSF website to find things that are similar to yours. And when you're looking at a specific program, make sure that you look at what has been funded. Most of the programs on the website now offer a link at the bottom of the program page saying what's been funded recently. So you can click on that, sort through, and find things that may be similar. If a lot of the recent awards look comparable to the type of work that you're wanting to do, it may be a good fit. If you can't find anything that looks like what you're proposing to do, then it may not be a great fit. But always, when in doubt, talk with a program officer and confirm. Once you've done this process, we recommend developing a concept paper, or at least one page up to 5 pages describing your project. Keep in mind that NSF is interested in the intellectual merit of the work and the broader impacts. So discussing those in that concept paper can be helpful. But mostly what you want to do is provide a brief bit of background, outline your research objectives or program objectives and your expected outcomes, and then be prepared to share that with a program officer. We have a lot of resources available on developing a concept paper and contacting a program officer. So if you need material that's in addition to what's presented in this slide deck, please feel free to reach out and we can share that with you. Once you have a concept paper in hand, you're ready to reach out to a program officer, ask for a meeting, either on phone or if you happen to be in the DC area or attending one of the NSF conferences, ask for a conversation in person. Offer to share a concept paper, and if the program officer agrees to review that, send it, give them time, and then come prepared with questions to find out how you can improve. We include here an example email to a program officer, include the relevant information, reach out to that program officer. Program officers are listed on the program solicitations. They are listed on division and cluster pages, and so you can find someone who might be a good fit that way, or again through the award search. You'll see for awards that are similar to the projects that you have in mind, you can identify the program officer who is in charge of those particular projects and reach out to them. Once you've done that, send an email along these lines. Wait a week. If you haven't heard in a week, email again. If you haven't heard back in a couple of days, give them a call, leave them a voicemail, and follow up with an email letting them know that you sent that you left a voicemail and sent these emails. If you haven't heard after that, probably a good indication that you should seek another program officer. Sometimes staffing changes don't make it to the website fast enough, and you may be contacting someone who's no longer there. You may be contacting someone who's on vacation, or very rarely you may be contacting someone who doesn't like to talk to people. They're not very common, but occasionally you do run into them, and so you definitely want to find a different program officer if that's the case. So when you're having that conversation with a program officer, you want to ask straight out, is my IT a good fit for this opportunity? And if it's not, are there others that you think would be a better fit? Sometimes a program officer will direct you to a different program that they oversee. Sometimes they will direct you to a different program that a different program officer oversees, and they can help you make those connections. If it's a good fit, ask how you can improve it. Ask what are the things that people do wrong when applying to this particular program. How can you avoid making those mistakes? If it's not published on the NSF website, ask about success rate for the program. That can be helpful in engaging your likelihood of success. And then ask about how to follow up with the program officer. Remember, in these conversations, the program officer has a lot of information that they're willing to share with you if you give them the opportunity. So listen more than you talk. After the conversation, follow up with an email outlining what you took away from the conversation. This gives the program director an opportunity to correct any misunderstanding, and also serves as a source of notes from the call when you or the program officer wants to follow up later on. When you get feedback from a program officer, take it seriously. If they recommend changes to your project, you probably should do those. If they encourage you to submit a proposal, definitely do that. If, on a rare occasion, they say, do not submit to this program, you should definitely keep that in mind as well. If they recommend other opportunities, be sure to look into them. They know what they're talking about, and they're involved in the decision-making process. So you want to make sure that you're respectful of their advice. So when you're developing an NSF proposal after that program officer has said, yes, please submit something, you want to start early. 3 to 6 months beforehand is what we recommend, although we certainly know that some people do it in less and others will take 12 to 18 months. It really just depends on how you work, how prepared you are, and what you want to submit. We recommend developing a clear timeline for yourself that includes all the different steps that you need to take. That should include getting feedback from your colleagues or from people like us who do reviews and revisions of proposals. Make sure that you build in time for that, because getting feedback from other people will always improve your proposal. Be sure to keep track of everything that's required, and make sure that you're talking with your internal grants office, Office of Sponsored Programs, so that they're aware that you're planning to apply for something and they can help you in every way possible. An NSF grant has a lot of different moving parts. This is a list of parts that are common to most applications. Occasionally you'll run into an application that requires something else, but you want to make sure that you're aware all these things need to be developed. You'll see a lot of slides here that provide some examples of how to address specific elements of the NSF proposal. Here's the outline that we often recommend if a program solicitation does not offer or require a specific format. Starting with an introduction in the project description is important, because the project summary, which is a one-page summary of an overview of the project, the intellectual merit, and the broader impact, is often used by reviewers to sort proposals into categories of projects that they're really excited about, they're definitely not excited about, and a category in which you have an opportunity to convince them that they should be excited. A lot of reviewers don't come back to that project summary before they read the project description, and so providing an introduction can be helpful in reorienting them to the overall project. You need a literature review of some sort, something that describes the work that has been done in the past by others or by you. Results from prior NSF support are required in all proposals, unless otherwise specified in the solicitation. This section must be included even if the only thing you say is, we don't have any prior NSF support. You need a conceptual framework, hypotheses, and research questions to show reviewers your overall view of the project and what you're attempting to answer. You need to include your methods, scope of work, and a management plan. The management plan can include roles and responsibilities of individuals, can describe partnerships, it can describe decision-making processes, dissemination, and other things. Anything you think needs to go there should go there. You can describe staff and institutional qualifications in this section if it's not clear from the bio sketches and other documentations. But if it is clear from those, then avoid using space here for that. Most proposals should have an evaluation plan. You may or may not need an external evaluator depending on the type of work that you're doing. In most cases where an external evaluator is helpful, the program solicitation or program officer will let you know that. But that's one of those questions you might want to ask when you're talking to a program director. And as of this year, all proposals, unless otherwise stated, are required to include broader impacts and intellectual merit statement in the project description. Previously, it was limited to broader impacts, but now an intellectual merit section is required. We typically use those sections as a summary of the rest of the document, summarizing the intellectual merit that was outlined in the methods and concept, and a broader impact section outlining how this work is going to benefit society. So there are a lot of tips here on how to write a strong project description. I'm going to leave most of these here for you, but I'm going to identify one important thing, and that's this second bullet point. An NSF program officer once said, let no question fester. And this is important. Your role as a grant writer, above all else, is to anticipate the questions that reviewers will ask and answer them in advance. The better job you do at that, the better reviews you'll get every time. Reviewers really dislike having questions that are unanswered. They'll nag at them all the way through, and if more than 2 or 3 of those unanswered questions accumulate after a couple of pages, then they begin to make their decision that this is not a project that they're interested in funding. You want to make sure that you answer those questions in advance. One of the great things about getting that feedback from external colleagues or consultants like us, or even your sponsored programs office, is that often they can identify where you have not anticipated and answered those questions in advance. So the project summary is very important. Again, it's how many reviewers will sort proposals before they even get to the project description. And so you want to spend a lot of time on this. It can be valuable to develop this as part of that concept paper development, and then revise it repeatedly throughout the process, and probably polish it as the final document to make sure that it truly reflects everything that that ended up in your final proposal. Start early with your budget. Make sure that your budget is aligned with typical awards in your area. So don't go too far outside the norm unless you've consulted with a program director and gotten advice that a different type of budget might be okay. Make sure that you include all the things that you need to include and none of the things that you shouldn't. Your Office of Sponsored Programs can help you with that. If you have questions about what's allowed and not allowed. But also this comes down to looking at your proposal and thinking through everything you're proposing to do that has an associated cost, and making sure that that's covered in the budget. One really important thing here is that NSF no longer allows cost sharing unless it's required. And so when you are budgeting, you may be thinking, oh, well, I don't have to include that because the department will cover it. Or I have this other in-kind contribution that I'll use for that. It's okay to rely on those things, describe them in facilities, equipment, other resources, or in some cases to describe them in the budget justification, but you cannot include dollar amounts for any of those things. Because once you do that, then that's considered voluntary cost sharing, which is no longer allowed. So, Biosketches. Biosketches are very important. There are a lot of examples online. Make sure that you take a look at those if you don't have a biosketch already developed. Include all current and pending support, facilities, equipment, and other resources. And again, these are slides that you can look through when you have a chance. One note on the data management plan, which is required for all proposals. Different directorates and sometimes different clusters or programs have different expectations for the data management plan. This is the generic description from NSF, the expectations for all data management plans. But again, different directorates may require other information or may request information in a specific format. So you can ask a program director or search the NSF website for examples and specifications on those. If you include postdocs, you'll definitely want to include a mentoring plan and look at examples for what to include. So briefly, we're going to touch on the review process because it's important to understanding, again, why we keep saying so much that you need to talk to a program officer or program director. So you develop your proposal, submit it, NSF gets it. What happens at that point? Well, at that point, the program officer responsible for that funding area looks at your proposal and decides who should review it. They make the reviewer assignments for your proposal. Then they oversee the peer review process where those reviewers come and discuss the proposals and make their decisions about which projects are fundable and which need more work. Then, once they make those recommendations, the program officer reviews those recommendations, keeps in mind what was said during peer review, thinks about all the conversations they've had with investigators before proposals were even submitted, and looks at their portfolio of projects and says, okay, the panel recommended these 15 projects for funding. I have money for maybe 10 of those. How do I decide? Well, a lot of that decision process comes down to whether or not they've had conversations and contributed to developing your grant idea. Because if they have, they've been moving you toward an idea that's a good fit for their funding portfolio. Not too much overlap with other projects that are already funded. Interesting research directions that address the mission of that particular program. And so you're more likely to get a yes as long as you pass the peer review component of the process. The program officer then takes those recommendations to the division director. In most cases, the division director agrees with whatever the program officer recommends, and then funding award notices go out. Although there's a process there where NSF often will ask some questions or renegotiate budget. And then once all that's done, they approve the award and cut a check. So it's important to understand that how involved the program officer is in that process and why you should reach out to them. When you're looking at how things are reviewed, these are the general questions that all reviewers are supposed to ask about proposals. How does it advance knowledge in the field? How does it benefit society? That's the intellectual merit and broader impacts. Is this a transformative project? Is it well reasoned based on a sound scientific premise? How qualified is the team? Do they have the resources and environment necessary to do this? And if they don't, have they obtained collaborators who do? Or does the grant award that they're requesting fill the necessary gaps? So keep those things in mind as you're writing. So we talked about the peer review process and again how important the program director is in that process. And there are times when a grant may not go through that peer review. Sometimes the program officer is the one making the decision, and that's important to know. A couple of things on peer review. You're looking for all excellence and very goods. That's the best indicator of getting a recommendation for funding from a panel. If you have all goods, then certainly there's room for improvement. The panel found some things that were praiseworthy, but not quite enough to bump you into a fundable category. If you have fair or poor, you absolutely want to follow up with the program officer and determine whether or not those the reasons for those fair or poor markings are things that you can actually address, or are they things that indicate a poor fit with the panel and that you should be looking elsewhere for funding. Be sure to have those conversations with the program director. There are a lot of things that go into understanding how panels make their decisions, and program directors can tell you after the fact a lot about what went on in the panel discussion and how that influenced the ultimate decisions. So be sure to have follow-up conversations. You can look through a few things here that talk about how to understand different people making decisions on your proposal. Again, the relationship is important with the program director. The panelists are the people who are tired, have too many proposals to review, and really need your help with a well-written proposal, so they don't have to struggle through it to understand what you are proposing to do. A couple of quotes there on things that make for high ratings and low ratings, and an overview of what you can expect from an NSF review. When you get those reviews, be sure to read through them and use them to improve your proposal. And as I've said before, don't resubmit without talking to a program director. Okay, so things that you can do to make your projects really competitive for NSF. Make sure it's transformative and timely. Don't propose to do a study that was standard 30 years ago if there's nothing particularly timely or relevant about it now. Try to focus on things that NSF has a strong interest in, looking for trends in their funding, discussions with program directors, or other information coming out of NSF. Make sure that your work is cost effective, so you're not proposing to do small incremental steps for large amounts of money. Make sure that you show reviewers that that you are contributing to the field by publishing. Demonstrate that you have the interest and skills to do the work by going out and learning new things, collaborating with people who have skill sets that are complementary. Get funding from whatever source you can, whether that's a small local foundation, a small internal award, or participating as a collaborator on someone else's funded proposal. Where appropriate, participate in research training and STEM outreach, because these things show reviewers that you're engaged in the field. You can also offer to be a reviewer when you're having those conversations with program directors. Let them know you want to review. One of the best ways to understand how people do things well and how people do things poorly is to actually see all of these proposals that are coming through and to understand how that process works. So be sure to volunteer to do that. So briefly, we're going to look at NSF STEM, which is scholarships for STEM students. It's designed to provide scholarships of up to $10,000 per student per year, and can also provide additional student support activities and services. The goal is to increase recruitment, retention, and graduation of specifically low-income, academically talented STEM students. The great thing about STEM is that every STEM-related department in your institution is eligible, and each STEM-related college at your institution can submit an application every year. And so if you have multiple colleges that are STEM-related, they can all submit within a given year. Um, Eventually, you could have multiple departments, up to 5 at a time, that have active STEM awards. So it's a great opportunity to get some money into your program and to support some deserving students. In the Track 1 institutional capacity building program, you can get up to $650,000 over 5 years. 75% of that has to go to scholarships. Up to 25% can go to other activities. We recommend that you go through a process of identifying what your specific college's needs are, to figure out where the barriers are to recruitment, retention, or graduation of these low-income, academically talented students. And we have a lot of great resources and even a planning guide on how to go about doing that, that can walk you through the process needed to identify those barriers and then develop a competitive proposal. You should use best practices. There's a lot of literature out there that shows what has been done by other institutions, and you want to integrate that into your program to be successful. So I'm going to stop showing slides for a second and share my screen with you so we can look briefly at the STEM solicitation. And it's a good way for you to see what NSF solicitations look like. Aaron, please let me know if you can't see this. So this is the current solicitation for STEM. You'll see here that it notes the full proposal deadline. It's the last Wednesday in March each year, so you have until March 2019 to do this. Let's see. So you get a synopsis of the program, briefly tells you about the program, tells you STEM disciplines that are supported. If you have a STEM discipline that you think might be eligible but doesn't clearly fit in one of these categories, reach out to a program officer to ask. You see here cognizant program officers. There are 3 listed. You may want to look up these individuals and see what areas they're in to see if one of them may be more relevant to the particular area of your interest. But you can also go to the STEM website on the NSF website to see if these have been updated. Note that there are a lot of awards, 60 to 80 every year, and a lot of funding. There are 3 different tracks. So the institutional capacity building is for institutions who have not had an STEM award before. That's the one that goes up to $650,000. Those in track 2, single institution up to $1 million. In track 3, for multiple institutions, say for instance, you wanted to collaborate with a community college in your area or another institution, you may want to apply for a track 3 that's up to $5 million. All of these awards include all of your direct and indirect costs. So questions on who can serve as PI essentially is a person who is in one of the STEM disciplines that is covered by the award. That's essentially the limitation. There are expectations that other people will be involved in the project, including a STEM administrator and an educational researcher. So you'll want to look for those people. And then looking down through the solicitation, you get a full description, including program goals, which are those that we discussed: recruitment, retention, student success, and graduation. And then also looking at new models for confirming that prior models actually work for improving those outcomes. You can look at the descriptions of each track there, and then scroll down here. There are multiple resources, lots of publications that can help you understand what the challenges are in this area and how people have addressed them, which is a beginning toward getting some of the best practices information. And then looking down here, you see that there are specific requirements for scholarship recipients, things that NSF says they must meet, And then you'll also develop your own requirements for recipients, such as grade point averages, um, standardized test scores, those sorts of things. And then you get into the description of what should be included in the proposal. And again, this is where some of those resources that we've developed on how to plan for and develop an application can come in handy. And so if you're looking to develop an STEM application, please reach out and we can provide that information. So that's a brief look at the STEM solicitation. And with 5 minutes left, we're going to stop for questions. So feel free to ask questions in the chat box that opens at the bottom left of your screen, or if you prefer